it's changed quite a bit. Native plants is also something it's not a fad, it's not a trend, it's here to stay, it always has been. Some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight are not new. Folks have always known these things, but they may have slipped from our focus, and now it's so important to get that back. Are we all good?
Yeah, we're all
Okay,
good.
great. All right. So again, thank you to Planet Wild for asking me to come tonight and share. And then I'm going to run through a variety of topics, and then I'd like to for sure get everyone involved in a discussion about where their questions are and where they are with the native plants. Is it this one?
Nice change. Use the computer itself.
Good idea. All right, so native plants. In order to talk about native plants, you need to know what native plants are, or at least what we're talking about as far as the big picture. It's up to you how detailed you get. There's plenty of resources out there, really quick hit resources that you can go to, and then there's much more detailed resources. So native plants, thought we should start out just making sure that everyone is familiar with what are native plants, so we're on the same page on that. Native plants were those that were here pre-European settlement. So pre-1850s is where we're dating back to. When I think of native plants, and when I design with native plants, I'm always looking at plant communities. And plant communities could be shoreline, forests, grasslands, and etc. We actually know what was here, and this is a fascinating database that we have access to. When the land surveyors went across the state of Michigan and created all the grid for all the county lines, they took data for all of the soils that they came across, all the different soils, the plant material, the animals, and written all of that in data, which was then has recently been then put into map form and also book form, and now searchable data form online. So we have all of the data, which is pretty impressive that we were able to actually have that. So one sheet that I'm going to refer to is our Why Going Native is Good for Nature and You resource. And for those that are online, we can get this up on our website too. So up on the right-hand side on the top is what we're going to concentrate on first. And this is the Michigan Flora Herbarium, University of Michigan. This is, there's two websites that are really, really important as far as telling where you can access information of what's native, what's not. And one of those is the Michigan Flora. And I use this a lot. It has the searchable engine where you can actually go in, and if you know the name of your plant, you can put that in, and then it will come up with all kinds of data. But if you don't, you can use this resource as putting your county in, and then say, oh, I want to know ferns of Benzie County. So you can put Benzie County, ferns, and then you actually can put your moisture content if it's dry or wetlands, and then that will come up with a full list of all those plants, and then you can individually click on those plants to have a lot more information and pictures. So it's a pretty amazing search engine that has been developed. All of this information is what came out of that long list of information from the surveyors and plant material. Next thing is the Michigan Natural Features Inventory. And again, this is an incredible website. You can go through and look up different natural plant communities and resources. And it will go by county and show where those different natural communities are. So those two websites are really important for knowing what's native, what's not. Another thing just to bring into focus too is that vegetation map. This is again information from when those surveyors went across the state. So this is a map of Benzie County, and you can see Crystal Lake, and the green part that swirls around is the Betsy River watershed area, and we're kind of on the end of the middle of that. And it goes through and tells you all the different plant material that was here, again, pre-1850s, pre-1800s. So you can, those maps are on the website, and you can go per map, per county throughout the whole state of Michigan, including the UP. Okay, so we have really good resources of saying what's native and what's not. Also, when we get into native plants, a misunderstanding at times, as it is, if you look out in the fields or even in the forest, if it's growing all over there, it must be native, right? Well, not the case. When we look especially across a lot of the fallow farm fields, a lot of those plants in there are not native whatsoever. Those are just plants, and a lot of them are invasives that what came in after that farm field went fallow or orchard or any kind of disturbed area that was left to whatever seeds were going to come in from human impact, animals, or wind. So forsythia, lilacs, lily of the valley, good old myrtle, sweet woodruff, and garlic mustard, not part of our native. When you look across and see a lot of these, they are all over certain spots. And what's remarkable is even when you're in the backcountry and you might be out hiking into some pretty depthful forest area, and then all of a sudden you come across daylilies, myrtle, sweet woodruff, maybe a lilac even in there. All of a sudden you realize that that probably was some homestead or some cabin, and those plants were brought there at that way some time. So it's that's why it's really important to know what's native and what's not. So we're not going to run through all of these, but as far as this, all this information is on that resource sheet. But just to point out a few, why use native plants? There is a whole list of why to do it. You know, they support our entire communities of life by providing food and shelter, preserve the natural diversity, thrive in local soil, reduce runoff. The root system on our native plants are amazing, especially for stormwater runoff. Provide natural mosquito repellent, offer natural resistance. I guess I am going through all of them. Provide a dynamic show. I mean, they are just beautiful. And the last one is reduce the size of your lawn is another reason why you can add your natives in there. So there's a whole list of reasons why. And also, if that's not to convince your neighbors or yourselves or others in your community, how about pollinators? Those pollinators, we need native pollinators. The pollinators need the native plants. It goes on a whole circuit there, especially bees. And we particularly are interested, if this is something that can get your attention of your neighbor even more, the pollinators in your food. So this slide is getting a little bit on the older side. This came out of a bee conference that Cheryl and I were at one time. It's been a few years ago, but this is a very interesting one as far as pollinators in agriculture. So top slide on that, picture on that is your produce choices with bees. And then you're a little sadder when you go to the grocery store, because without bees, Your shelves are going to be a little bit less and your a variety is going to be quite decreased. So again, there's a lot of reasons really quick why native plants are in the forefront. But important reason beyond all of those, because all of those are pretty much more human needs, is insects. Insects need native plants. That relationship that they have has been developed over eons. And when we go and we start talking about insects, those insects are ones that we can see and ones that we can't see. And there's a lot of research and data that's out there about this subject. And we're talking about insects too. You may want to say beneficial insects to lessen the, oh my, you're talking about insects. You want me to add insects? Yes, we do, because everything revolves around insects. So what happens with the insects? They need native plants. There's a chemical within the plant leaves that are the habitat with insects. There's a certain amount of insects, which is a smaller number that can go to all kinds of plants. And then there is a larger number that just goes to certain plants or a few families. And if you take those families away of those plants, then you lose those insects. And there's some really detailed information out there on that subject. So who else needs the insects? The birds. The birds need the insects for protein for their babies, the grasshoppers, the caterpillars, the fish, they need the insects. There's a whole story of the great monarch butterfly. And some of this information we've been working on as Planet Wild and discussing in Planet Wild since the day that we pretty much started, only there's a lot more development on research and especially on the insect part. But when you come back and look at that information every once in a while, it just cements why we're here and why we're doing this. So that great monarch butterfly, we have in the Great Lakes Midwest, there's about 5 different milkweeds. There's a milkweed for every situation. There's some for the butterfly milkweed on the left for sandy soil, swamp milkweed for the wet conditions, poke, common, world. There's a shade one. And those milkweed, guess what? That monarch butterfly, if they don't have that family, they're not going to exist. They can't go to a spice bush. They can't go to an oak tree. They need that particular family or they don't exist. So that childhood story that we all learned long ago, that important, and it's that simple. Down below, this is was that storm cloud? This is a piece of grass, and it's amazing the hidden treasures that you see. Does everybody see that down below? So. But how can you go wrong when this is what you need to do with providing that habitat? Butterfly weed, that orange flower, butterfly weed has a nice tap root, works really well in the landscape, beautiful seed pods, and then you get the caterpillar and the butterfly coming back. So this whole subject on native plants really got a lot of attention back in 2007, about that time period. When Douglas Ptolemy came on the circuit and started talking about insects at a level that we hadn't heard in the forefront in the general public. And Ptolemy is a professor out in Delaware, entomology, wildlife ecology, University of Delaware. And he wrote the book, Bringing Nature Home, which we have a copy back there. And that book broke open the subject on native plants and insects. And if you have a chance, please take a copy and read it. You may become very consumed very quickly. Most people that take the opportunity to read it become start looking at native plants much differently. And those that are in the room, we do have a snippet of that book and that a handout also. But two of the quotes that he has on his website and that I think that are really important, and I keep coming back to these and reading these every once in a while, is we are at a critical point of losing as many species from local ecosystems that their ability to produce the oxygen, clean water, flood control, pollination, pest control, carbon storage, etc., that is the ecosystem services that sustain us, will become seriously compromised. So a lot of information there. And then the next one is even more of a simple statement that gives us all the opportunity to come together. In the past, we have asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, and feed pollinators. I must have that behind the slide. So it is really important to take a look at our gardens and think of them beyond the prettiness, and look at them in the functionality and the habitat. So one thing that Douglas Ptolemy has also done, and his group of researchers and organization, is they came together and now have Homegrown National Park, a national park that we all can be part of across the United States. And this, I think, is a really interesting, and also it gives hope, and also gives us all something to work towards, making all of our homes, the property that we govern, our communities, connected together. So the Homegrown National Park. We can't do this again. And this was reality. And that's why we keep coming back to the native plants, because this actually happened. And it's incredible, the thought that this was something that they thought they never could cut all the trees. Well, they did. They cut a lot of the trees. We have a few virgin areas left and pockets. And if you ever have a chance, going up to the Porcupine Mountains or Sylvania Wilderness or some of the other UP spots, or even over in the middle of the state, if you have the chance, spend some time, go there and just really take in what it's like. And hopefully we can now move beyond that and take care of the land. Because we can do this. We can do this with our home properties and our community. We have different places in Benzie County that have said, all right, we're changing over to native plants. It can be slow or it can be fast, but we're making the effort and making the statement that we're going to move forward. Crystal Downs out in Benzie County Golf Course has taken a big stand over the last 5 years to starting to move their central focus area over to native plants. And we have more phases that will be going on. We've been doing a lot of stormwater runoff projects with the city of Frankfort, and a lot of, we're fortunate because of many of our community areas up in Leelanau, Grand Traverse County have been working on these big stormwater runoff areas and putting native plants as those plants that are soaking up the water and helping out. This is at Bellows Beach down at Crystal Lake in Benzie County. So now, instead of what was there previously, which was a degraded park, We have storm water that's being controlled and native plants that are soaking up that water. Cardinal flower in the forefront. Businesses, commercial areas are coming on board with native plants. At Storm Cloud in Frankfurt, we've got plants that are right up next to the entrance of the, it's all shade native plants where you can find violets and bellwort and Solomon seal. And then as you go out farther, a variety of native plants that have more of a structured setting and those that go more of a free form. The one thing that I find with native plants and using them within the landscape is it depends on what your goals are. Native plants, it can be something where it can be, yes, real natural and free form, or it can be much more maintained and structured. And one thing when you're working with your neighbors is take a look at where you are. And if your neighbor has a much more maintained, area, perhaps if you're going to be putting in native plants and you want to do more of a mass planting, have more of a structure up next to your border. Mow the strip in front if there is a mowed, or use a low ground cover right next to any walkway that gives it a little bit more maintenance. There's also some of the plants like Hypericum and Potentilla and New Jersey tea, which are small native plants that are going to get 2 to 3 feet tall. Those, what works out the best is actually giving them a nice round haircut in the springtime and then let them fluff out from there. And those you would never suspect that they're, maybe you wouldn't even know that they were native plants because they have a very maintained structure. So you can use native plants in a very structured planting or a real natural one. Again, stormwater runoff, really important for soaking up the roots, soaking up the stormwater with those deep roots. Shoreline projects, and also it just depends on the type of plant that you choose as far as heights. So this is along a Platte Lake and a seeding area in the back. All along the shoreline, you've got wild strawberry, Canada anemone, and phlox plosas up there, but choosing plants that are low enough so you can still have those views out to the shoreline. This is CSA, the Congregational Summer Assembly. They have been doing a lot of native plant work throughout their whole area. Pollinator gardens. Great spots for kids to hang out and come see the bees and butterflies. Then you've got areas that a lot of folks that I work with say, we don't want a lawn. I'm like, oh, that's great. It's the best thing you could tell me. Let's do some mass planting, lawn alternatives. This is on Crystal Lake. We have a much more a contemporary type design here with the yellow shrubs that are blooming up front are Hypericum calms. So again, that smaller shrub added spruces and birch. Wintertime, there's a whole mass planting of little blue stem, which you can see in the background, that copper color. But again, using native plants in a much more maintained, controlled setting with a contemporary look. Or this is over at Beulah, and this is a corner of down by across from the public beach area. And we're created a whole pollinator garden on the corner of that property. Grasses, a big part of plantings. Mass planting, that's a big successful way to use native plants. This is all little blue stem along Crystal Lake. Planting in rows too can add order. Again, alternatives to lawn, using mass plantings a little blue stem and then spotting through with all kinds of perennials. Many of our cities have gotten on board with different projects. I know down in Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, Frankfurt, have gotten into using native plants along the corridor. If you're in the area along the M22 corridor in Frankfurt, the whole planting along from the bottom of our town for several blocks is all little blue stem that's been planted along with June grass and other pollen and other butterfly weed, and then serviceberry and other plants, and also down in the bottom, stormwater runoff again areas. This is at our grocery store with just recently with serviceberries blooming, and all below all of those rows are little blue stem. And also an edible landscape. So this one last year, there was, I came by, I live in Frankfurt, and I was on my bike and I saw two people gathering berries off the serviceberry in the parking lot at the grocery store. And I thought, wow, how cool is that? They're at the grocery store getting food, not inside, but off the plants. And they said, not knowing who I was, of course, these are great berries. And they were eating and putting them in their bag. And they're like, we're going to have these tomorrow for in our pancakes or whatever they were doing. So it was really cool. So that happened last year. Again, the beauty of the native plants. There's just incredible projects out there that give these areas life. And that's what it's all about, bringing your landscape to life. And how can you go wrong with something like that? I don't know how many there are, but you can count them. That was in Frankfurt a few years ago on Joe Pye weed. So one thing that occurs too is just knowing for your own knowledge and to understand how to know what plants and how to purchase plants. It's really important that you know Latin names and scientific names of plants. So there's the genus and the species. The first part of the first word in the name is the genus, and that starts with a capital letter. Represents a group of plants, the similar characteristics. And the second name is a species, and that's a lower case letter. And then if there is a third word, that's usually the cultivar. And the cultivars are those that are in quotation marks if you have that third name. So cultivars is a big subject. There's a lot of research that's being done out there, and there's a lot more to go, and we may never know exactly how those insects relate back to the cultivars. If you want to have native plants, if you want to have the insects and want to have that, that goal, then you need to use the straight varieties. If you end up choosing to use a cultivar, then the best thing is to not step too far away from the cultivar or from the parent plant. If its size is, if you've changed the size, that's usually doesn't change the insect's ability to come to that plant. But when you start changing the leaf color or the flower structure or the berry and make a berry sterile, a seed sterile, or the berry size bigger, or the bloom bigger, or coming at a different time, you have probably changed the plant far enough where if you're, again, the goal is to attract those insects, that may, you're probably not, you've gone too far away. So cultivars, again, it's go back to the native plants, and those varieties usually are the best ones anyway. For an example, on black-eyed Susan, standard cultivar that I do use, the Gold Sturm, but this particular one, so you have the genus, your first, then their species name, and then that third name, and that's a cultivar. They've taken that parent plant and reduced the size and controlled more of the structure. So that particular cultivar stays within about 24 inches. Going back to our resource sheet, when we first started Plant Wild, it was very interesting because there was not the native plants available in our area. And the Benzie Conservation District was trying to see if they could bring some in and sell those at their spring sale. We ended up getting plants from Ann Arbor because that's where we could find them for perennials to bring in. Since then, look at where we've come. We have just great resources and growers in our region, in our state, and in the Midwest that now we have access to them. There's no longer, I can't get native plants. We are way beyond that. When contractors tell me at this time that I might not know, and they say, we can't get these plants, I can't find these plants. It's like, you're not looking, because these plants are available now. You need to go to usually native plant nurseries or take the next step because you may not find them at just any type of nursery. And also, as far as if you keep asking your local nursery if they don't carry native plants, then maybe someday they would, because they want to sell you plants. So in our area, everything from Four Seasons and Black Cat Farm and Greystone. And I don't think on this one, Black Cap's not on there, but that's one of our main ones down in Onikama. Need to update this. Oh, this is an older sheet. This is an older sheet. I have 2023 edition that will be up on the site.
Yeah, because you don't have birds for that.
No, I don't have a few of them on there. So plant native plants, call to action. The biodiversity is so important. Start digging in and get on the map. Native plants equal a healthy environment to live in. For some reason that's off.
Hold on, we've gotten out of sync with. Here we go.
Carolyn, try and move slowly.
Live in was on the screen at home. So, all right. So what I'd like to do is open it up to. What time do we got? 7:43. Questions. Open up the discussion.
Yes.
Okay, Grand Traverse County Conservation District has their native plant sale this coming Saturday.
Yep.
At Cass Road at the Nature Center.
Yep.
Tickets from 10 to 2. And the big supplier you don't have on your list is Garrett.
Yeah, Bird's Foot. It's on our other resource list. Yeah, Bird's Foot Native Plant Nursery. In South
Is it
Florida,
on?
provides a lot of the plants to the local sales.
He also sells at his nursery.
Yeah, it's not an open retail. You have to contact him.
Right.
But yes, you can now get there. Other comments or questions in the audience? Yes, Diane.
So another good reason to learn the Latin names. My favorite quote from Ed Voss, who was Mr. Flora. Common names are for common.
Do you want to repeat that? So
Yeah, you need to repeat that.
So Diane from the audience said that, I'm not going to repeat that. Do you want to,
Knowing the Latin names
knowing the Latin names
is
is,
important, because common names
maybe we should
are
have
for
a-
common people.
common names are for common people. Maybe we should have those that want to add more come up too. And that's a good one. And that is very true. You have to know the Latin names. It is very important as far as that goes. That's why, and you need to know, that's why those wonderful search engines are out there. And also, when you talked about sales, well, I noticed that Leelanau County is going to have their plant rescue sale. They're back doing that Memorial Day weekend. I have not seen that for maybe since prior to the pandemic. So if you're looking for native plants, especially woodland plants, there's a group up there that is still, I guess they're still rescuing because they're having that sale. And if you're going to go right when that opens, because they get cleared
They sell
out.
quick. It's a Friday, Saturday date.
Yeah.
I think, check the Leelanau Conservancy site for that. I believe Brian Zimmerman from Four Seasons provides the other native plants that they sell. We have different suppliers at different sales.
Where is that located?
You'll have to look online. I'm not
Yeah.
sure where the Leelanau Conservancy office is.
It,
Right downtown in the square.
in Leland, yeah. Go on to get all the information, because I just saw that and I was whipping through things, but it did catch my eye because there's some really good plants. Sometimes if there's things left over, Four Seasons brings them back to their nursery, and there's some good stuff out there. Those plants need homes. Other discussion, Debbie.
Say to people when they say, well, I see butterflies or bees on such and such a plant that isn't a native. So they must be doing okay, the butterfly or the bee must be doing okay.
Okay, for our Zoom people, we need to say, what's the answer to people who say they see insects nectaring on non-native plants? So what's the answer to that?
So there's a lot of plants out there that they'll go for the nectar part, and they'll go to, it doesn't, as far as native, non-native, they're searching for the nectar. So there's plenty of plants, but it's the host plant that's going to be how they survive as an insect. So that monarch butterfly will go to all kinds of plants to get the nectar. But if you don't have milkweed, it doesn't exist. And what's really interesting about these insects is their host plant could be trees, an oak, a bush, spice bush, or a perennial. I mean, these host plants where they actually get their life from, their habitat, is totally different than nectar plants, because the nectar plants, they can go to a lot of different ones.
There is another piece, I'll get close to you. There's another piece of information about the non-native plants is that the quality of their nectar and pollen is not necessarily equal to the native plants. So for example, our autumn olive, which is an invasive plant, and when the birds really like those berries, it's like just having sugar water. It doesn't have any other carbohydrate, protein, or fat in it, which is why they poop them out so quickly and spread them so quickly, because they eat a lot of them, because it's like one of those, popsicles, with sugar water. And dandelions, which of course it's no mow May, my personal pet peeve. Dandelions have only 40% of the nectar and pollen that bees need. And bees who are on a solely, the excuse is, well, if it's a lawn, at least a dandelion's something. Well, we found that bees cannot reproduce on a dandelion diet. So while we see a lot of butterflies or bees on things like dandelion, they're not getting what they need. And so just that observation is not enough. We have proven that they need what is native. And that is the science. So that's where I go with that one.
Awesome. Thanks, Cheryl.
Oh, yep, go ahead, Richard.
I bought 2 plants up Zimmerman from Ryan about 5 or 6 years ago. One is a cup plant, and the other is a compass. And they grow very tall, and they are very prolific, and they're covered with all kinds of insects, but I don't think that they're native.
Oh, the question for the Zoom people is that one of the audience members have bought a cup plant and a compass plant. They're both in the Silphium families and planted it. And it says, he says, I get a lot of insects and things on it, but I don't think it's native. So the answer to that is they are.
Oh,
We have 5 Silphiums, rosinweed and cup and what is the other one? Prairie dock. So there's a lot of Silphiums. They grow very tall. They're very tough. And yes, when they're in bloom, the insects are all over them, like white on rice. Yes.
Some of them spread a little bit more than others. And to pick up on the cup plant particularly, this is where you get into some pretty cool things. So the cup plant on the stem where the leaves come out creates little pockets where the water collects, which then is a drinking source for insects, bees, and hummingbirds. So that plant has an extra service to the plant, the insect community and the wildlife. So it has its own drinking fountain. And that's where some of these plants, you know, when you're looking at with the birds particularly, and people say, well, I want to attract birds, and they'll put the bird feeders up. The bird feeders are for us. They don't need us to feed them, but they need the native plants. So if you plant the native plants, they'll have all the food that they need, and all the caterpillars and all the protein sources for their babies, and then the fun berries and everything else later on. And seeds, but they need the native plants. That is just a complete important component of the life of them. You might have some more to add to that.
Yes, 96% of our baby birds are fed insects. They are not fed seeds. There may be 1 or 2 maybe that eat seeds. The other 4%, can anybody guess what they feed their baby birds? Fish. They're all the birds that are out of the sea and along the shoreline. Insects. So when people say, I don't want chewed leaves, you say, well, wait, that's bird food. That's where we're going with this. We want to make bird food by having chewed leaves. We have a question here from the Zoom group. When should we cut down the dead stems to make room for spring growth? I understand the stems provide winter food and shelter for some insects.
Well, leave them up as long as you can, but Cheryl has a more direct answer for that.
Consistently 50 degrees. We have so many things that overwinter in leaves and they look just like leaves. And so you have to leave those leaves and the stems. In the fall, if you have a cup plant and it is 6 feet tall, you don't need to leave that. You can cut that down to 4 feet and insects can still nest in that. But yes, so that was, it's now 50 degrees. We've just passed our last cool nights and I think we can do it now. So if you, oh, wait, Lucy's shaking her head no. Okay. Okay, someone said, wondering why Wild Ones isn't on the list of websites relevant to native plants. And we can certainly add that. We have a seedling organization of Wild Ones trying to get going in Traverse City, and we welcome them. And certainly Wild Ones is an important organization. Their mission and information is very much like Plant It Wild, but they are have a home office and have chapters throughout all the states. So it's a national organization. Oh, can speaker please repeat the questions? We're trying. Is there any possibility for a list with addresses of places people could do a self-guided garden or landscaping tour to see what others, including municipalities, have done for models and inspiration? Well, certainly, I think there's a possibility of that. Anybody want to put it together? So Diane, we'll see what we can do. If we get to that, we'll put it on the website. So keep checking that.
And to add on to that. You just brief on that nice one along the South Shore of Crystal Lake that was last year.
We didn't do that one last year. That was what, Periwinkle?
2 years ago.
2 years ago?
Periwinkle and the Crystal Lake Woodshed Authority.
Okay, so the question is, can we redo a tour around Crystal Lake? Looking at, I think, rain gardens and other gardens in the area. And we certainly could host one of those ourselves and put it on our field trips next year. Is that a suggestion that we're getting? Is let's have another, okay.
And one thing I'll say too is to add to that is we've been very fortunate that there has been quite a few with the garden clubs in Traverse City and Frankfurt and the associations. We have a very active community, and it's very exciting that with the garden clubs particularly that had been probably a little bit more traditional as far as gardening, have taken and seized native plants as part of their gardening, and also for tours. So they were a big part of some of the shoreline tour that they did independently. The other thing I was going to say too, as far as just the change in folks looking at native plants through MSU and the Michigan Nursery Landscape Association, things are changing. Just recently, there is a symposium that's coming to Grand Traverse County at the Barns.
Yeah, it's at the Botanic Gardens at Historic Barnes Park.
And it's a 2-day event, but it's being promoted by the Michigan Nursery Landscape Association. And a lot of it's all about native plants. And that was really exciting to see them looking at native plants in the forefront. I'm seeing more native plant articles in their publications too, which is exciting. And so because there's a pretty strong nursery movement and turf as far as having that be the most important. So it's great to see native plants being looked at and starting to get attention.
Question from Zoom. Can you also discuss how the different life stages of insects require different host plants? You want to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, when we talk about host plants, we're talking about the plants that the caterpillars eat. And when we talk about nectaring plants, there's much less specificity. As Carolyn mentioned, monarch can nectar on any native flower it likes. It's just that it has to have the milkweed for its host. We do have one butterfly. It depends on their life cycle and when they go into hibernation. We have butterflies that hibernate as adult butterflies. And when they emerge, they're trying to time it with the plants, but it doesn't always work. So they are actually initially dung feeders. And so they will go to dog poop and deer poop and rabbit poop as their first food. And then they will go through their life cycle the rest of the summer. We have caterpillars that overwinter as caterpillars. And one of those is the woolly bear. I don't know if you've noticed in September and October, they're just all over. You practically step on them. And they're going into their winter home in your leaves. There is one, and I don't remember its name, that overwinters as a caterpillar, and it eats hosts on one kind in the fall and a different one in the spring. I'm gonna have to look that one up again, so I have it at my fingertips, because I thought that was pretty amazing. So the egg is laid on the host plant. If it's confused, and in Pete's Woods, we have a plant in the mustard family called toothwort, and toothwort's in the mustard family. And if there's garlic mustard present, the West Virginia white butterfly might lay its eggs on garlic mustard, which then it hatches to a caterpillar and the caterpillar can't eat it. So you want to make sure it has toothwort and doesn't get confused. So the conversation about host plants for caterpillars is a really important one, that we make sure we treat that whole life cycle, which would be the egg and the caterpillar. The adults, the list of what they will nectar on, you know, is as long as your arm. So I hope that helps. Diane, let's see. I need to leave, but bravo. Okay. For a new beginner using native plants, where to start? There's lots of resources. I had one book when I started, Landscaping with Michigan Natives. And now there are a lot more. I would say just start small. And now, any other questions from online? Let's see. Oh, here's thanks for letting us from far away in the Keweenaw Peninsula Zoom. Christine, we're happy to do it. We're so excited to have people from around the state. Oh, we have a confirmation. The rescue plant sale is Friday and Saturday, May, she said 27th and 27th. So it's Friday and Saturday at Leland Village Green. Check it out at lelandconservancy.org.
And also, since you had one actually from the UP, is that someone that's living there or visiting?
Yeah, no, she lives up there.
So one of our native growers, Vern Stevens down in Langsburg, has encouraged and helped set up folks in the different compass areas. So there is one from the south, one east, west, and UP. His son is in the UP in Marquette area and has a native plant nursery in case someone's looking for native plants that's a little closer to home than here. So
Bird's Foot Native Plant Nursery in South Boardman. Garrett Noyes was originally Designs in by Nature North, and he changed his name to Designs to Bird's Foot Native Plant Nursery, but he is one of those satellites from Vern Stevens.
and Bird's Foot has recently gone where you can purchase retail online. And otherwise he's a wholesale, but you can actually get plants from him retail now.
Yep.
So.
Any other questions? Yeah, Beth.
Is there a thought on the number of different varieties of plants you should have within your garden? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Do you understand?
Like,
You want to answer that?
have lots of a few kinds, or do you want to have a few of a lot of different kinds?
Well, I think diversity is very important. The more diversity, the more you're going to have, the more diversity of insects that you're going to be able to have habitat for. So diversity is really important in that sense.
The question was, you know, how do you decide which plants to have? A few of a lot of plants or a lot of plants with just a few of them? When I'm working on just a pollinator garden itself, I go through plant lists that by bloom time, you know, I'll go through and say, okay, these are early spring, these are later spring, this is summer, this is later, and make sure I have one or two or more from each one of those because we want the bloom to be throughout the season. And so I kind of start with that as my thing. Because otherwise, if I just start picking what's pretty, I might end up with everything that blooms in July. You know, I need to
Sure.
spread it out. And then if you want to get deeper into the weeds, you look at the flower shape. Because different insects like different flower shapes. So you want something that's tubular, which would be a columbine or a penstemon or a cardinal flower. Those have the little tubular, because there's long tongue things that want that. You're going to want something that's open and flat. You want to want things that's panicled. I mean, but that's getting into the weeds, you know, as it were.
You could also look, and to me, when I'm working on designs, looking at plant communities.
Yep.
And that's where going back to those websites and learning what kind of plant community that you're in or trying to achieve is really important. Because that plant community, depending on what it is going to have the canopy all the way down to the ground cover. So that's again, back to those resources and knowing what's native, what's not, and also looking at the whole picture. Also, when you're looking at even a site in a residential area, say just in town, you can start thinking about your own property as plant communities. And again, just imagine, a typical house within a urban setting where you may have the shade is your forest community on the north side, or maybe you have more shade trees too. You actually can have your wetlands community by your downspout or stormwater runoff or foot washing area that you just have a lot more water at. You may have your sandy soil, dry dune community over by the road where it's gravelly, where those plants all of a sudden have a place to be. And the butterfly weed, the little blue stem in that sandy, gravelly soil. And so think of plant community when you're looking at your whole picture. It's amazing how many people will say to me, well, there's nothing that's going to grow there. And it's like, and I kind of think, well, there was something growing there at one time, and there's a plant for every place. And so, and Mother Nature kind of has it all figured out, and we just need to pay attention to what was there and duplicate that. So, and what Cheryl said is all those are really important aspects too.
Well, I like to speak as a newbie. So I feel like my method is to plant it and see if it grows. And there's so much to learn that I think it's kind of overwhelming at first to think about plant communities and time and shape of the flower. So I advocate like just starting, planting something, see how it goes, and more of it, if it does well.
Okay, we have a comment from the audience for our Zoom people that are still with us that says it's a little overwhelming to think about when you're starting out and you're a newbie to be doing the whole plant communities and flower shapes. And she said, I kind of just take a plant, put it in and see how it does. And I think, Cheryl, if you're talking about, some of your area, you're probably looking closely at the prairie plants where you are. So you're not going to go too far outside. You've got full sun.
Yeah,
In
know
areas.
Started, I wasn't even aware, I go down to Black Cap and like being befuddled by all of the options, so I would despise them.
Right.
I
And so
think that's a great way
it's
to
a
do
great-
it.
yeah.
Start with something. Start with something easy.
Yep, don't be
that goes.
befuddled. Buy plants, put them in the ground. See what happens. Oh, yeah, go to Planet Wild's website and get ideas of plants there. And the other thing with thinking about blooming is shrubs and trees, as Carolyn was mentioning, the canopy, the understory, they all bloom too. So if you kind of look at the architecture and count them in, then you can go to the perennials. We're going to have a program here in August that's going to be designing with native plants. And Matthew Ross from the Botanic Gardens is going to be doing that for us. Because when the board was talking this spring and last fall, getting ready, like, what do we need to know? And it was kind of like, just throwing the seeds out and seeing what happens is not a look they appreciate. So we're going to try to tame those plants as we go into August. So other questions, other comments? Anybody else? Oh, other resources, Monarch Gardens is another resource. Ben Vogt was our keynote speaker last July. We have 2 of his books here. So thank you, Diane, for that. And then SEMBA butterfly.org has a butterfly garden walks coming up. Okay. Yep. Talking to, oh, sorry. I'm reading and I'm misbehaving. Yes, come on, Carolyn. Yes, so Benjamin Voigt and his Monarch Garden website is a great resource. I think that may be on my big sheet, but definitely his books are there. And SEMBA butterfly.org has a butterfly garden walks coming up on meetings and events page. So if you go to SEMBA butterfly.org, they have some events coming up.
And I also have that resource sheet. That's all updated. I think I pulled it off from an old presentation. So we have an updated resource sheet for 2023. Also on that resource sheet, and Steve Stevens back there reminding us that Prairie Nursery, Prairie Moon, they also have great educational sites that you can go and order a catalog and have it in hand, or go online and look at their information that way too. When we purchase plants, our goal is to purchase locally, region, and state, and then Midwest. So we really want to, as much as we can, purchase locally.
We have Prairie Nursery catalogs here for you tonight. We find them as an excellent resource to learn about plants, so you're welcome to pick those up. As we're not paid by them, we ask them for catalogs. They send us as many as we want. I use them in my presentations. So they're very kind, they're very good. They've been doing this a long time. But again, we use them if you find great things. If you can shop locally, better idea. Yes, Steve?
The Prairie Nursery catalog this year is different in as much as they are gearing it to different types of soils. So if you know what kind of soils you've got, they're gearing the plants to the soils as well as they're all native.
Right.
Which is pretty helpful for those as well.
Okay, so the comment is that the Prairie Nursery catalog has sorted the plants by soil type, and that makes it kind of easy. If you're in clay, you're in dry, you're in wet. You don't have to have your soil test to know what you've got, but you can assess that and stick to those plants.
And Dorothy had a question?
Oh.
Maybe still.
You plant all these native plants, but there's still the non-native plants and the invasive plants. Are these sturdy enough to kind of take over instead of the others, or do you need to do some weeding, or what do you do about the ones that you're trying to ignore?
So the question is, what do you do with those non-native plants and those invasives? And the first foremost thing is you need to get rid of the invasive plants. That's really important. The garlic mustard, the autumn olive, for honeysuckle, on and on, for Phragmites. So it's really important to have that taken care of first. And then it is then those non-native plants, such as if you were to plant within a say, an area that has the good old MDOT grass mixture or orchard mixture, you know, it takes quite a bit. You have to commit yourself, is the goal is to turn over that whole area to a different vegetation. And if that is the case, then there's mechanical and then there's herbicide methods to do that. Otherwise, planting large enough plants to help keep be bigger than those plants that are there. So let's see, I was gonna go someplace else. with
Where
that.
else were you gonna go with that?
No, I'm just thinking about that.
No, that's okay. Russell just asked if to help because he has a lot of things that are not native. He's a wonderful
So-
man, but
So one thing, I don't think I mentioned this before, but this is really important that, you know, if you have your specialty plants, you know, hydrangeas or something like that, that you really want, okay, as long as they're not taking flight and moving away or the berries are being spread. So if you're using non-native plants, as long as they're not invasive non-natives. If you're using non-native plants in a setting such as like myrtle, that's not going to get up and run away if it's contained within a sidewalk, all with cement. But as you move closer to any natural resource areas, you really want to think, you want to think before you put that plant in. Because myrtle, sweet woodruff, all of those ground covers and shrubs can just march right out into that native area and take over the whole area. So we've seen that time and time again. So when you're getting up to natural resources, really think hard about what you're putting in there before you plant that plant. And you might be responsible, but that property might be turned over someday to someone else and they'll just let it go. The other thing too that I thought of, because I was seeing that in another spot earlier, was when you get those annual pots at the end of the year, the biggest thing is don't take them out the back of the deck or into the ditch across the road and dump them, because those vines that are in those annual pots are a big spreader of non-native plants.
yes, if you have vinca,
Or there's just,
anything at English ivy in a pot, because you want that thriller, spiller, that you do want them in the trash. If you have baby's breath in a flower arrangement, you do not want to compost that. It goes into the trash. There are certain plants that do not play well. Now, another thing about when you're landscaping with natives, the newer concept, it's just, I don't know, 7. Oh, what happened? Is that better? Okay, I'm back.
you
I
need
just
to
have to
come
get
over
closer.
closer. But
Want to weed. Plant something that you to have there. I have an example of a bed that I just wanted to take. And I put in trees and shrubs. Something's happening with this.
Yeah, I wonder if the batteries are going.
Could be. Anyway, so all I did was put trees and shrubs. I have another very large pollinator garden. And so I just didn't want a riot of flowers everywhere. And about 2 years in, I got a flat of Potentilla simplex, a little ground cover. And I have pictures of it when I put those in, and then 2 years later, and it's just amazing. I do not have to weed very much when it's densely planted. And that's another way to think about it, is you can put things like Pennsylvania sedge underneath shrubs. You can put other things in and make it all plants, and then you don't have to weed. So there's another way of dealing with that.
did we hit on what you were thinking, Dorothy? Or
Well, if you don't want to weed, you plant densely. That's the key. In layers, yep. But just densely plant so that the plants you want cover the ground and not the plants you don't want.
Fill the root zone, fill the root zone. That's
Yeah.
the key. Fill the root zone.
Yep. Okay, anything else? Shall we wrap this up? Okay, thanks for coming. It was great conversation. And see you in a month, if not before.
Thank you.